As I sit here 4 days before Christmas Eve, this is the 20th. Christmas Eve would be the 24th, so 4 days before Christmas Eve. I'm thinking to myself, remember Ed Demming? Well, Ed Demming was an interesting character. His concept was smooth sailing. In order for a business to thrive, it had to function. It had to function well. Ed Demming was in the automotive industry, Detroit, back in I want to say the 60s. And he had a concept that was about to become a paradigm shift in the philosophy of automaking. The assembly lines, were busy and cars were cranking out of Detroit like you wouldn't believe. Milwaukee as well, I guess. But anyway, the point is that the U.S. automakers had been doing such a great job. I mean, I hate Henry Ford for the racist bigot that he was, Nazi sympathizing son of a bitch. But his automobiles are still on the road in 2021. So that's quality, okay? And what Ed Demming was all about was continuing to create the finest automobiles. And Detroit had a change in mind. For them, it was, how can we sell more cars? It wasn't that they weren't selling enough cars. They wanted to sell more cars. And the concept came, if you can recall, the K car. Chevy, the GM came out with the aluminum block engine, which, in those terms, in the 1970s, it was all about reducing gasoline consumption, which is a noble idea. But they were also using cheaper aluminum and not steel. They weren't making the motors out of steel. They started making them out of aluminum. And the concept of the K car was Plymouth, the Dodge Plymouth people. And they, the K car. That whole idea from Detroit was create a car that would last 5 years and be a throwaway. Yeah, they were cheaper, but they were cheaper built. And you really, at that point, Detroit had started to manufacture the cars so that you had to go to a dealer in order to get the car fixed, because they were making tools with a reach around, and they were hiding bolts and covering things to the point where the backyard mechanic couldn't fix their own car, which is a piece of shit thing to do. Now, back to Ed Demming. Ed Demming went to Chevy, GM, and he had this idea that if you could put out a better car, you have, less recalls, you'll have less issues, you'll have less defects. And his thought was that if you put on the assembly line a button that any person on the assembly line could stop the conveyor belt if they found a flaw or defect, or if, somebody was turning out a Monday morning car, they could stop it, take it off the assembly line, repair it, and then put it back on the assembly line. Detroit's belief was, management, yes, the big bosses, the high-paid executives,
Well, if you did that, every son of a bitch on the line would be stopping production.
Yeah, every son of a bitch on the line would be stopping production. Demming was looking at it like, cooperation, and they were looking at it as being usurped or undermined. They laughed him out of Detroit. GM, Plymouth, everybody laughed him out of Detroit. They didn't want anything to do with such an ignorant concept as total quality management. Demming was washed up in the auto industry in the United States, so where did he go? He went to Japan. And the first place that he stopped was Toyota. Toyota jumped on it. Nissan jumped on it. Everybody. They said, absolutely, let's do this. And when you stop and think about it, in the 1970s, Japan was selling cars in the United States, but not that many. Because everybody what? Everybody thought whatever came from China or Japan was junk. Until Ed Demming. Nissan would take a car 50,000 miles. They'd run it on a track 50,000 miles. They would take it apart, find out what was wearing, repair that part on the assembly line portion of assembling the cars. They would fix those pieces, not just repair that shoddy piece, but actually remanufacture to the point where it was no longer a weak part. And by the 1980s, Japan was outselling the United States cars. Why? Because of the K car, the throwaway car. Detroit thought you were stupid. Yes, the Japanese are still outselling the American cars because of a man named Ed Demming. Thank you, Ed.